When the butler observed the miracle of the mute Egyptian oracles play out before him, it probably weighed heavy on his heart as each wise man was stumped. Not a single one of you guys has even a vibe or a loose, hazy possibility to share with a king? Seriously? Oh no, thought the butler. I'm going to have to mention that Hebrew I quickly forgot about in the dungeon. Imagine the lineup of dream interpreters the king would have in our modern day. The palm reading, star sign believing, crystal meditating, yoga class running, latte sipping, Buddha babbling, off-grid living, hippy dippy wacky tobacco smoking, yin and yang believing, wannabe gurus. Well, Egypt had just as many of those crazies as we do today, and not one of them opened their mouth. The greater miracle isn't that Joseph could interpret the dream, it's that all the Egyptians were silenced by Yahweh. Genesis 41 verse 1. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. Joseph has now been in Egypt as either a slave or a prisoner for 13 years. From an earthly perspective, we'd say the best years of his life wasted and stolen from him. But God had a bigger purpose in the making. He was training Joseph for the role of a lifetime, saviour of the world. When we're going through dungeon darkness times, we must lean upon the Lord and trust in his greater plans. Sometimes God allows bad things to happen in our lives so we're prepared for a greater role in the future. Joseph could have turned his back on God after 13 long, dark, desperate, miserable years. But he would have missed the greater glory ahead. He would have excluded himself from the joy and blessings God had planned. We all have dreams on a regular basis, but Pharaoh instantly knew this dream was different. It jolted him from his sleep. Occasionally you wake up mid-dream, and the details are hazy and jumbled. Then you drift back to sleep. By morning you can barely even remember waking up. But God imprinted the details of this dream deeply in his memory. He slept, verse 5, and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. 2 vivid dreams in one night. All the details imprinted with clarity in the king's mind. 2 lots of 7-fold, fat, fine and plump, being eaten by 2 lots of 7-fold, thin, ugly and gaunt. The way verse 7 ends, you know this second dream in particular really rocked Pharaoh. He genuinely believed that second dream was a true life event. He really thought he was in the field, watching those 7 ugly heads of grain eat the 7 plump grains. God spoke impactfully to the king through these 2 dreams. The king knew there was heavenly potency in these dreams. There are numerous examples in the Bible of God speaking to people through dreams. I'm no loopy, happy clapper, but I believe God occasionally speaks to people today using dreams. Let me emphasize, occasionally. Don't go on a dream interpreting quest once a month. What was God trying to tell me with my latest vivid dream? No, a dream from God is a rare thing. But if you've had a dream from God, there's little doubt as to the power and impact of the dream. Verse 8, now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. The king couldn't shake these two dreams. We've all awoken from some troubling nightmare, and once we acclimatise and realise it was just a dream, we shake it off and move on. But Pharaoh couldn't move on from these dreams. You see, there was God-given power within them. God wouldn't allow Pharaoh to shake these dreams off. They turned over and over in his mind. It was a dream, but it was so real. Pharaoh could almost taste and smell the scenes of these dreams, as if he'd really lived the events. And then an even greater miracle occurs. In the land of the superstitious, the land of the polytheists, the land of the dream interpreters, not a single wise man could interpret these two fairly simple dreams. God blinded the oracles. He confounded the magicians. He silenced the prophets and priests of Egypt. The Egyptians worshipped a god of dreams called Bes. Tutu was another Egyptian god responsible for protecting Egyptians from bad dreams. But no, even the oracles of these gods were made mute and dumb before Pharaoh. Verse 9. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. We each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. When the butler observed the miracle of the mute Egyptian oracles play out before him, it probably weighed heavy on his heart, as each wise man was stumped. Not a single one of you guys has even a vibe or a loose, hazy possibility to share with the king? Seriously? Oh no, thought the butler. I'm going to have to mention that Hebrew I quickly forgot about in the dungeon. Imagine the line-up of dream interpreters the king would have in our modern day. The palm reading, star sign believing, crystal meditating, yoga class running, latte sipping, Buddha babbling, off-grid living, hippy-dippy, wacky, tobacco smoking, yin and yang believing, wannabe gurus. Well, Egypt had just as many of those crazies as we do today, and not one of them opened their mouth. The greater miracle isn't that Joseph could interpret the dream. It's that all the Egyptians were silenced by Yahweh. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. I love this powerful quote. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Joseph, the Hebrew, is hurriedly made presentable for appearance before the king. When we come into the presence of the King of Kings, we'll be made presentable by the blood of the Lamb, and will be given a pure and righteous robe supplied to us by our Redeemer. Isaiah declared, For he has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness, as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. Joseph is transported in an instant, from the prison to the palace, from the dungeon to the dwelling place of the king. Are you ready for the imminent calling of the king? The rapture could occur at any moment. Joseph stood ready, humble, giving praise and glory to Yahweh, the provider of peace, confident in the omniscience of his deliverer. Then Pharaoh recounts the two dreams to Joseph, adding a few additional details. The skinny cows were as ugly as Pharaoh had ever seen, and they remained just as ugly and skinny after eating as before, emphasizing the famine would be so devastating it'll be as if there were no good years at all. Verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty heads, blighted by the east wind, are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe." And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. 7 in the Bible is a number indicating completeness. Not perfection, as I've heard some preachers say, but completion. The first week was completed after 7 days. 6 days of creating, 1 day of rest. 7 days, the first week completed. 7 years of plenty are coming, and once completed, to be followed by 7 shocking years of famine, completing the cycle and the prophecy. Joseph, whose name means increaser, declares the 2 dreams are one. God confirmed the dream twice to Pharaoh for added emphasis. This 2 times 7 cycle will commence immediately. Pharaoh, you have no time to waste. Your plans for surviving the land-depleting years must commence now. There'd been famine in Abraham and Isaac's day, but they were nothing compared with the 7 land-destroying years ahead. Verse 33, "Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine." Pharaoh knew these dreams were important. They'd completely rattled the king. And for the first time in his rule, all the oracles and magicians were mute before him. No answers, no insights, no words at all. And now this dungeon dweller steps forward. Is he just another man with an overinflated reputation? After all, Egypt was full of dream interpreters with puffed up reputations that all failed to give clarity to his dreams. But Joseph was different. Not only was he good looking, but he was a Hebrew and a worshipper of Yahweh, the God of the famed ancient fathers, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The moment Joseph opened his mouth, Pharaoh knew the words he spoke were true. Joseph spoke with absolute confidence. No hesitation, no doubt in his eyes. Clear, straight, rational, cut through truth. Everyone who heard the words of Joseph heard the ring of authentic truth. And not only did Joseph have the interpretation of the dreams, he has the clarity of mind to present the rational plan for a 1/5 collection in preparation for the severe looming famine ahead. Verse 37, "So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, 'Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?' Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you.' And Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt.'" Everyone heard and saw the wisdom of Joseph's words. The Bible narrative doesn't go into detail, but I suspect immediately after Joseph spoke, the king and his advisors had a quick huddle. And just like that, Joseph becomes Vice Regent of all Egypt. From lowly foreign prisoner, no hope of release, to second most powerful man on the planet. I believe it's telling that Pharaoh says, "Can we find a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" When Joseph spoke, he spoke with heavenly power. All could see and sense the presence of God when Joseph spoke. God has given Pharaoh his answer of peace, using Joseph as his human mouthpiece. The king had been troubled all day, since his dreams. No human agent could bring him peace. But the Hebrew God Yahweh filled this exceptionally good-looking Hebrew young man with words of peace, truth, and comfort for the king. And the instant elevation of the Hebrew Joseph adds strong evidence to the theory that Pharaoh was not a native Egyptian. Verse 42. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, "Bow the knee!" So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him as wife Asnath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph now is finally in the place God had planned for him, Vice Regent of Egypt, ready to be Saviour of the world. He was sent to Egypt, his clothing stripped from him. Now he's clothed with kingly garments of fine linen. He was sent, chained as a slave to Egypt. Now he's elevated to Vice Regent with a ruler's golden chain around his neck. As a slave, he went into Egypt with no adornments. Now he wore the signet ring of Pharaoh, giving him all authority of the regent. He was likely forced to walk on foot to Egypt. Now he rode in the royal chariot. He bowed and served as a slave in Potiphar's house. Now all Egyptians bowed the knee before Joseph. He was on the bottom of the pile when cast into prison, wrongly accused of attempted rape. Now he stood atop the world. As a slave and a prisoner, he had no rights to independently travel or move about as he pleased. Now he had the authority of Pharaoh, and no man could lift his hand or foot without Joseph's consent. Joseph was indeed the one no man could keep down. He was knocked down, debased, removed of possession and dignity. He started with nothing repeatedly and always ended on top. You want a story about a great man who always overcame adversity? Then read about Joseph, the one who trusted in Yahweh. He's given a new name. We're not even sure what it means. He's given a bride, the daughter of the priest of On. Potiphera, his father-in-law, a slight name variation of the man he'd earlier served as slave. Years spent in prison, learning the role of an administrator. Now he has freedom to range over all Egypt as he pleases in a luxurious chariot of Pharaoh. Until our next study, may Joseph's God and my God, Yahweh, richly bless you all.